Um, Bruh, damn, 2026 really ain't holding no punches. Yeah, U.S. is up to what, like two leaders of countries taken or killed, right? Have we done any others that I forgot about this year? I wouldn't really be surprised. Help me not think for a minute that the world is on fire. You know, so I go back to May 1937 by Sharon Olds, is what we're reading today. And I'm not sure this is the happiest poem in the world. Like, I skimmed this a little bit. This was recommended by uh, Bite Kiosk in the Discord for our classic poems. And this one's not exactly like a happy, positive poem to maybe remind us that the world isn't on fire, but at least it's poetry. So we can think about poetry, right? instead of instead of what uh empires are, doing to each other, what massive hulking government bodies are doing and victimizing their people too. May God burn America on a spinning wheel. Yeah. They try to kill Trump again too. That's crazy, dude. I didn't. You can tell I don't really pay attention to the news. Uh, like I don't like force myself out of the loop because it's important to know what's going on, and it's important to uh you know be aware. Like, it's like cultural context is valuable, but also important to stay sane. And sometimes art, helps us do that in some capacity. So we'll read some art, some poetry. 1937, lol. Yeah, maybe not the best year. That's an important cultural context, right, in this poem. Uh, that's something that's really important in analysis in general, right? Is like the context of what's happening at the time of writing and the context of the events in the poem. 1937 is when that's when World War II started, right? Not a very pleasant year. It started 37. That like the official? Is there an official start? I'm not sure we're actually talking about that based on what we skimmed here, but it is it is relevant. It places these characters that we're going to read about in a very specific cultural time and a very important context, right? This is by Sharon Olds. For those who don't know Sharon Olds, which I don't really actually know Sharon Olds that well, other than that I've heard her name a lot as someone who's like a good poet. She's alive. Okay, that's dope. I thought she was dead. She's just old. It's in the name. Uh, I'm gonna read some of her bio just because like we're doing this thing on Saturdays where we're reading classic works, and I think knowing about these poets and who they were is really important too, uh, because that's like history. That's valuable. Sharon Olds, born in 1942. 1942, which means she was born but 5 years after this poem. So we can do born 1942. So this poem is about a time 5 years before her birth, and it's about her parents, from what I skimmed. So that makes sense, right? Poet Sharon Olds was born in 1942 in San Francisco and grew up in Berkeley, California, where she was raised. She has said, as a hellfire Calvinist, She attended Stanford University and earned her PhD at Columbia in 1972. She was 37 when she published her first book of poems, Satan Says, so very Christian influenced between being a Hellfire Calvinist and first book, Satan Says. Olds won the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize, which is really important. Poetry Foundation gives that one out. It's like for a lifetime achievement in the poetic arts or whatever. Olds is the author of 12 books, blah, 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 blah. She had a divorce. Olds' work explores a wide range of topics and themes. Venerable poetic mode to address numerous topics, including gender, age, and sexual politics. Explored similar veins of an autobiography, personal myth, and dream. Olds released a collection of selected poems. 2 decades. Okay. Olds was known for writing intensely personal, emotionally scathing poetry, which graphically depicts family life as well as global political events. So, sounds like she maybe, has an interesting relationship, right, with her family, with her upbringing, probably, some amount of Christian influence, but may or may not have like changed in that regard, because it sounds like she moves into, things about gender, things about family dynamics. Maybe there's something there. It didn't have too many details, right? But that's some good context on Sharon Olds, right? So here's the poem. I go back to May 1937. I see them standing at the formal gates of their colleges. I see my father strolling out under the ochre sandstone arch, the red tiles glinting like bent plates of blood behind his head. I see my mother with a few light books at her hip, standing at the pillar made of tiny bricks. The wrought iron gate still open behind her, its sword tips aglow in the May air. They are about to graduate. They are about to get married. They are kids. They are dumb. All they know is they are innocent. They would never hurt anybody. I want to go up to them and say, stop. Don't do it. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. You are going to do things you cannot imagine you would ever do. You are going to do bad things to children. You are going to suffer in ways you have not heard of. You are going to want to die. I want to go up to them there in the late May sunlight and say it. Her hungry, pretty face turning to me. Her pitiful, beautiful, untouched body. His arrogant, handsome face turning to me. His pitiful, beautiful, untouched body. But I don't do it. I want to live. I take them up like the male and female paper dolls and bang them together at the hips, like chips of flint, as if to strike sparks from them. I say, do what you are going to do, and I will tell about it. I go back to May 1937. That's like really, really intense, as far as poetry goes, right? Not only do we have like some of these early descriptions. Tiles like blood, wrought iron, sword tips. Like we're painting everything in a very like kind of heavy, brutal manner. And then, this contrast of innocence and purity, uh, beautiful, pitiful, beautiful, untouched bodies, uh, with this sort of, it's almost a like literary irony, uh, where she's looking at these people, Sharon Olds. This feels like a confessional poem. She um, knows something they don't, right? Looking at these kids, her being older at the writing of this than her parents were at that time. I mean, that's such a fascinating perspective, first of all, to look at one's own parents with this almost like motherly, you know, you don't know what you're gonna do. Like, I want to tell them, like, she's the wrong woman, he's the wrong man. Like that sort of like, you should choose a different partner that parents definitely do. That sort of pressure. Um, and their like really simple, vague innocence is contrasted with a very painful, but also very vague, sense of like the suffering they're going to create, right? You're going to do bad things to children. Like I love how this leaves so much space um, for the mind to fill in, right? Sometimes these deeply personal poems are most effective when they are like an abstraction of one's own life, right? And they leave so much space, right? So much fuzziness that the reader can then take this other person's personal experience and then like can relate this to themselves, right? It's so vague, this bad things to children. It's so vague, this innocence, that in many ways I can relate these things to me, and many readers probably can. And that's like such a cool, just sort of effective thematic thing that happens. And it's also like very simple, right? Words like hungry, arrogant, pitiful, beautiful, untouched. Nothing here is like particularly hard to access. It gives it all like this sort of like lightness of the memory, of the recollection, which is really cool. And it engages so earnestly, right, with like this hypothetical, but I don't do it, right? I take them up, I give them permission, I say, do what you're going to do. Like, it really allows you to believe that the speaker, which seems to be Sharon Olds herself, like is genuinely present and does actually have a choice where she could go back and she could tell them not to, and she doesn't, right? And she even handles them like a toy, like a paper doll, right? It gives us the impression that she does have some amount of control here. um and I mean, maybe that's really important, when it comes to the idea of like, don't write cursive, like the reclamation of one's own past or the acceptance of one's own trauma, right? We think of, maybe our own traumas. I think of my traumas in life. And in many cases, I would say, like, I would never want to stop those things from happening. I would never go back, and by owning, right, the suffering, by owning one's past, by owning one's generational and immediate interpersonal trauma, and telling about it, right? Um, one one reclaims their past, and one maybe like grieves successfully. Uh, I love this. I will tell about it. I'd imagine, right? We read very briefly in her, bio that she grew up very Calvinist, and like these parents then would probably both also be very Christian, very Calvinist, um, and it leads one to wonder, because this final line, and I will tell about it, that really feels like this moment of empowerment at the end of the poem, where like this is the control that, Sharon Olds has over that story. And you could think of a very Christian, a very conservative upbringing, maybe, in which, there maybe could have been a lot of silence, not very, no opportunity to tell. That would have been a bad thing. That would have been punishable. Knowing that you are going to do bad things to children is almost certainly Sharon Olds herself, right? And she maybe could not say about those things, right? And we heard in the bio that she writes a lot about family. She writes a lot about gender, these dynamics. And, this really feels like maybe that sort of permission of self to do those things, to own that, to finally tell. And, that could be, a lot of that's very speculative. That's not necessarily, specific analysis that's all coming from the text. Some of that is very much like contextual analysis and maybe making some associations. But it seems plausible, right? Yeah, I got the impression she was the child that would do bad things too. I think that is very textually supported. And I think as it relates to like her Calvinist upbringing, and maybe if she wasn't allowed to talk about those things or was made to be silent, that is more speculative, because none of that happens specifically within the poem, right? But it is plausible. And I think that's why it's important to have, this broader context, this like sort of historical stuff, because this already has helped us maybe make some connections about this poem that, just wouldn't have been made if we didn't spend 3 minutes reading her bio or some of it. And, those sorts of things, the context of an individual poet's life and what they might be referring to, a lot of that can be better gleaned and better supported by just reading more work from them, investigating Sharon Olds in depth. If these themes continue to crop up, one might start to draw those connections between poems. I think that's usually what I personally define as someone's poetic style, right? People talk about this word a lot. Like, what is your style? How to have your own poetic style, whatever that means. And I think style is really just like the connections we can draw between one's entire body of work. So between this poem and this poem. Let's say we read other Sharon Olds and it had other stuff that was like, she was Christian as a child, had trauma, wasn't allowed to talk about it, those kinds of things. That might make this poem more rewarding to read on like a second pass, for example. We don't have that. I would encourage people, if you like this poem, go read other stuff of hers. Tell me if there's other connections, if it elucidates anything new. But you know, that's it's a good like start, right? um, Chills Cassock. Yeah, this poem is very uh, yeah, it hits. There's so much like vibes, in like the atmosphere and just like the feeling of this poem that maybe comes from like the actual style of the writing, where it feels kind of like looking at a fuzzy photograph to me, I guess. And um, sometimes, I mean, I'm trying to be more willing to say things like that in my analysis. This poem feels like looking at a fuzzy photograph, because I think that's some of the most valuable analysis we can do, and then asking the questions of, how does this poem communicate that, right? It's like would I erase myself if I could? Yeah, that's the question she's asking, right? And um, it sort of has this echo of, you know, like suicide, which is interesting, right? Because even within the poem, we have this line, you are going to want to die. Um, and that's maybe giving some pretty uh this feeling of like, that intergenerational trauma, right? Right after we say you are going to want to die, we have the section of the poem which is suggesting this sort of um, time travel, stop your parents from ever birthing you kind of suicide. um, which that's like just such a very effective turn to go from their suffering to then one's own, but then one's own reframing of it and like the liberation, coming to peace, right, with that impulse, deciding to live. It's very powerful, right? Deciding to live is maybe the only uh, decision, right? um, Sometimes you wish you could. I Yeah, I mean, I understand that, right? Experientially. Um, I think this question from Ishmael is interesting too. You can't question mark, right? Um, and I think, right, like to end one's own life is one of those very fascinating like things where, it's sometimes it's not so much a decision, right? Where one can't like actively choose that because it's not a logical position, and it's something that happens at like a point as a reaction to just too much life. And a race is also very different. Yeah. Um, None of us can go back and erase ourselves and the memory of us and that entirely. And I think it's also an important distinction. Yeah. Um, I usually talk about my voice versus my style. My style is wildly erratic. My voice stays very consistent. See that, Nikki, by my definition, what you call your voice is what I call style. Because I just define style as like the elements that seem to persist throughout a body of work, where that could be topic, where that could be like the literal way the text is written, that could be structure, um, that could be vibes, that could be specific words that a poet prefers, the way one titles one's poems. Those are all things that can and cannot be part of the style depending on the person. That's sort of how I think about it. It's the only like satisfying definition that I've ever come to for that. Yeah. I'm gonna read the whole poem again. Uh, because we've had some cursory thoughts, and I think I may be getting an idea of some things I want to delve deeper into, and maybe it's that statement that I said, why does this feel like looking at an old photograph? um, maybe because it's literally talking about it, right? Uh, but that's an interesting thing to dive into. Maybe we'll talk about something else. We'll see. I go back to May 1937. I see them standing at the formal gates of their colleges. I see my father strolling out under the ochre sandstone arch, the red tiles glinting like bent plates of blood behind his head. I see my mother with a few light books at her hip, standing at the pillar made of tiny bricks. The wrought iron gate still open behind her, its sword tips aglow in the May air. They are about to graduate. They are about to get married. They are kids. They are dumb. All they know is they are innocent. They would never hurt anybody. I want to go up to them and say, stop. Don't do it. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. You are going to do things you cannot imagine you would ever do. You are going to do bad things to children. You are going to suffer in ways you have not heard of. You are going to want to die. I want to go up to them there in the late May sunlight and say it. Her hungry, pretty face turning to me, her pitiful, untouched body, his arrogant, handsome face turning to me, his beautiful, untouched body. But I don't do it. I want to live. I take them up like the male and female paper dolls and bang them together at the hips like chips of flint as if to strike sparks from them. I say, do what you are going to do. And I will tell about it. I go back to May 1937. This poem is like, it hits. So the big things that stick out to me, and maybe we'll try to talk about all of them, because these streams are Saturday ones are meant to really dig into a single poem. This I will tell about it is probably my favorite line in the poem. Which is, which makes sense. And I will tell about it. And this as a sort of like maybe not reclaiming I don't know, this as it relates to just like being a poet. You know, that line really feels like I am going to take all of my pain, all of my trauma, no matter what, right? Do what you are going to do. This encompasses all of the pain that she's experienced from her parents. And I am going to tell about it almost feels like her, in a sense, a statement of like this mission, this thesis of like, pain will come to me no matter what in life, even goes beyond this poem, right? The world will do what it will do, and I will tell about it, right? That like the story, the poem is a healing thing. I think that's like an interesting concept to talk about. throughout this whole poem. Uh, I do just want to talk about like the feeling, right? Um, the vibes. uh, and as I described, um, it's like a memory. It's like looking at a photo. Um, and I think to me that feeling, like maybe I'll try to figure this out as I dig into the poem, what that actually means. Because I think it goes beyond just the premise of, I'm looking at these photographs. There's something to me about the writing. There's something to me about the way this poem is arranged that like evokes recollection itself. And given that I've found that emotional reaction, which is really cool, we don't always find that in poetry. I would like to investigate that more because I think that's yeah, we'll get to that later. So that's important to me to talk about in this poem. I mean, some of this like pacing stuff is interesting, this repetition. I'm not sure. I mean, we do have this like you are, you cannot, her hungry, his arrogant. We have like some use of anaphora and repetition and this like doubling of things, which is kind of interesting, right? Um, and maybe I want to talk about this feeling that I get at the end. That's pretty important in this poem, right? Um, I want to go, right? From like this line on, I want to like actually involve myself with the past and like why this works, right? Like the weird temporal thing about this poem where we're talking about doing something impossible, right? And that like that works within like the magical kind of poem logic of this piece. I think that's really cool, and that's something to delve into. I think that connects to this. I think that also connects to this. But that's maybe like the outline of the things I want to really dig into with this poem because they're kind of speaking to me. And if there's anything particular that like really sticks out to anyone in chat, a theme that's coming through or a vibe or a part that you're interested in, I can also dig into any of that stuff. Hi, Maytari. Welcome in. Yeah. Because, I mean, this poem has, like, so much going on. I mean, like, between, like, this imagery stuff and, like I said, like, the actual sound things that are happening and some of this repetition, like, like even the language choices and this kind of stuff. Like this, like they are very simple. I don't know. There's like a lot going on here. And I think I'm gonna start with this one. I'm gonna start talking about this. Like trying to understand what makes this poem have this vibe for me. What makes this poem feel like I am actually like there looking at a photo, right? Because that is really something I relate to. Like we've done this. Many people looked back at old photos, and that's the thing I want to dig into first. Before that, though, I think we'll take a brief break, a few minutes to come up for air. Please move around. Please stop looking at the screen. Drink some water. Go to the bathroom. Get a snack. Do something good for you. Take care of yourself, And we'll be back in just a few minutes. Hello. welcome back. I hope you didn't miss me too much. We are still reading I Go Back to May, 1937, by Sharon Olds. And the first thing I think that we are most immediately diving into is like the feeling of this poem, the vibe of this poem. And I'm I guess struggling to find a more technical word. I think there must be one out there for like just like the ambient uh I guess like that I guess like that emotional kind of component that the poem evokes. Uh and maybe there isn't a good word for that because analysis tends to struggle with those things, and it's kind of why I'm excited to try to talk about it. But what I said when I read this after like the first time was I feel like the poem gives me the same feeling as I get looking at an old photo. Like it actually evokes that. And of course, the poem is talking about looking at an old photograph, right? We're talking about seeing them, seeing my mother, these like graduation photos, seeing my father at these places in college. Though we never actually specifically say it's a photograph. But like, these are photos, right? And we do say later, right? We describe them as paper dolls, which I think maybe has that second implication of photos, them being made of paper. But, this is what we're actually describing or alluding to in this poem because we don't actually ever specifically mention it. And maybe that helps, right? That like it's never explicitly said. But I think beyond that, I think what I'm interested in is how the other parts of the poem, the parts that aren't specifically alluding to a photo of my parents, gives that feeling of looking at something old and interfacing with the past. And it's conceptually very difficult for me even to think about how I would describe how the poem accomplishes this. But I'm going to try. Challenge myself, so to speak. So I'm going to read the whole thing again and start to underline as I go. And I'll do a new color for this specific topic just to keep it differentiated, right? I see them standing at the formal gates of their colleges. I see my father strolling out. Under the ochre sandstone arch, the red tiles, glinting like bent plates of blood behind his head. I see my mother with a few light books at her hip, standing at the pillar made of tiny bricks. The wrought iron gate still open behind her, its sword tips aglow in the May air. They are about to graduate. They are about to get married. They are kids. They are dumb. All they know is they are innocent. They would never hurt anyone. I want to go up to them and say, stop. Don't do it. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. You are going to do things you cannot imagine you would ever do. You are going to do bad things to children. You are going to suffer in ways you have not heard of. You are going to want to die. I want to go up to them there in the late May sunlight and say it. Her hungry, pretty face turning to me. Her pitiful, beautiful, untouched body. His arrogant, handsome face turning to me. His pitiful, beautiful, untouched body. But I don't do it. I want to live. I take them up like the male and female paper dolls and bang them together at the hips, like chips of flint, as if to strike sparks from them. I say, do what you are going to do, and I will tell about it. I go back to May 1937. The first thing I actually want to talk about is the title. So, talking about this feeling of like looking at the past and engaging with the past and like memories and these kinds of things. Not memories, because this is before she was ever born, but like things that are before. I don't know if this is a common experience, but based on this poem, maybe it's a shared experience between myself and Sharon Olds. I think that's a reasonable thing to look for in poetry. There are some people, I don't know, probably stuffy analytic types who would tell you to like not insert yourself and your own experience into something when you're trying to like objectively look at it. I think that's kind of silly because poetry is an emotional medium. I think it's useful. How do I share experiences here with the poet? Because I think this is like opens one up to like practice empathy and to recognize the similarities in other people. I think that's a lot of what art does. But I think the experience here that it like really hinges upon for me is that of we'll start looking at an old photo. And then not just like being a passive observer in it, but sort of taking the time to imagine what life would have been like. What would I be doing if I was in this setting? And people do this all the time. People will look at a photo of, I don't know, ancient Rome and say, yeah, if I was in ancient Rome, I'd be doing these ancient Roman things, and I would totally be, a centurion in the Roman army, or I would be like a Roman poet. I'd be wearing like these cool Roman clothes. Like I think this is at least anyone with like an ounce of imagination does. And we see this when people like ask each other casually the question like, oh, if there was one time and place in history you would want to go back to and live in, what would that be? Right? I think that is a fairly common experience. We see it in like historical fiction, or even people who maybe write like historical fanfic-y stuff that like places a self-insert character into another time. Like, this is an impulse we do as people, generally, I think, when faced with the past. It's like, what would I be doing if I was present there? Right? And I think a lot of people take this in a novel direction where it's like, oh, I'd be doing like this interesting thing that like this culture, this place, this time is doing. I would be checking out all these cool things. But Sharon Olds, right, takes it in like a much more real, much more visceral, heavier direction. That same impulse of imagination. I mean, we can think of maybe the author sitting looking at the photograph and playing this game. If I were there, if I was happening at that time, what would I be doing in this scene? Right? How would I place myself into this story? And right, the reality is like some pasts are painful and some pasts aren't something that are like a novel thing to recall. And so when she does so, you know, the answer is I would think about telling them to never give birth to me, right? I would think about erasing myself. And maybe that's even something that's a shared experience among people other than her. I've certainly thought about like the if I was never born situation. Sounds like, like Nikki, you mentioned it earlier as well. And I think it's really like the point of me, highlighting that phenomena is I think it's really what gives us, it helps us suspend our disbelief a little bit. Because, like, I think most of us also know how to play this game of going into the past. And so when Sharon Olds says, I want to go up to them and say, stop, right? This shared experience, I think, allows us to relate and say, like, oh, yeah, we're going back in memory. And it's like, what would I be doing? Oh, Sharon would be telling them to stop. And, we do some other things throughout the poem to support that, right? We're just talking generally about these very clear sensory details. We're talking about two photos that were probably, I don't know how photography works. I don't know if photos in 1937 were in color. I'm thinking they were in black and white. But I don't know. That's not a again, that's why like these numbers are helpful. But even so, we're describing red tiles, we're describing ochre sandstone. And in doing so, by creating like a really vibrant scene, we're bringing this distance of history, this like black and white 100 years ago history, to something more present, something more relatable to our own experience, which is just like color and sensory experience. Authors talk a lot, writers talk a lot, people who teach writing talk a lot about like using the five senses in writing and how that's like supposed to help. And it's like, oh, if you use five senses, you'll write better. I think this is like, like decent general advice, but I don't think that generally explains like the purpose of this, like why to use the five senses. And I think at least in this case, one answer is it can bring the reader closer to the experience of the poet themselves, of the writer themselves, where if I give more colors, if I give more sounds, if I give more smells, right, the reader then can really like start to construct this image in a more visceral way that feels closer to them. And I think in the same way that maybe Sharon Olds was stepping into this photograph, the more detail we give, the more opportunity it gives the reader to step into Sharon Olds' poem, that is, by proxy, to step into that scene as well, to really relate closely to it, right? And like tiles glinting and sword tips aglow gives us this very specific, time of day where the sun is coming down and shining off of things. And, we describe the pillar made of tiny bricks, ochre sandstone arch. We're giving enough detail that we can start to really like construct things. We even describe the gates as formal. So we have this like grounding, we have this stiffness, but then we have a relaxation of strolling, and a sharp glinting and a pale ochre. We have, blood, something intense. Uh, we have like light books. Again, this makes her similar to the father, like relaxed in the face of like the heavy weight of academia, bricks, sandstone, right? Blood, plates, sword tips, wrought iron, right? These things are heavy and sharp and kind of violent as compared to these people, right? It almost helps to imply, which I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but that helps to imply maybe the weight and the pain of knowledge that Sharon Olds anticipates for these people. They are young and innocent. They don't see that the world around them, that the world ahead of them is heavy. They are naive. And yet it is there behind them, as if they like ignore it and they're just casually strolling, carrying light books. What incredible contrast. So, right, we paint a very vivid scene. This gives us a place to step into. We characterize these people. And even like the poem judges them. Maybe accurately, maybe not. They are kids. They are dumb. All they know is they are innocent. They would never hurt anybody, right? And I think in doing so, like, this is the same impulse we have as people. If we go back to that story we tell, that game we play of, imagining ourselves in the past, looking at the past, I think it's very easy to look at something from another time and judge it. So we're again like filling out this experience and giving that impression, of looking at the photo. I want to go up to them and say, stop. Right? And this is a huge, like, sectional turning point in the poem where, like, before this and after this are vastly different. If we were to put a break of a stanza in this poem, like if you said, Imogen, put stanza breaks in this poem, I would most certainly do it here at very least, because this is the moment, like, we introduce this person, we shift tone very deeply. Now, I think it's nice that we go into it smoothly without a stanza break. I think that makes it easier. That makes it, like, not as jarring. So maybe it would actually take away. I think it's a good choice here to not break. But I want to go up to them and say, stop. And, like, we've spent all this time setting this scene, very detailed, characterizing these people, kind of filling out the world around them, so that when we go into the world and take action and have motion, like, it's grounded. If we just said, I see my parents, graduation pictures, I want to go up to them and say, stop. We've failed to have the same effect as this poem, because without the scene, it feels very strange. It feels very untethered. How are you going up to these people? They're a photograph, right? But by introducing them as something else, as something living, as something vibrant, it makes it much more reasonable, much more, like, comprehensible for the brain to just be like, oh yeah, we walk up to them. I want to see what's going on with these people. I love capital S stop. Like, there's some really powerful grammatical things that happen in this line. We don't have a period. That's really interesting. We don't have a period for the whole first section. Comma, strolling, comma, comma, I see my mother, comma, 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 We're just moving through, and we have like, that also means we have basically no capitalization, even though we're kind of doing like grammatical capitalization. We capitalize may, and it sticks out, and I think that helps establish us in time. We capitalize the first I of the first sentence and any other I's, and I think that sticks out as well, right? It like places, it reminds us that like Sharon is here. But then we have a period, and it's like, whoa, this is the first like stop. This really signals the change, like as much as a stanza break does. And then, but then we have capital I, so we're still sort of, like we haven't seen that much capitalization on specific words. Like capitalization hasn't been used much to make anything stick out. And then we have this like crazy capital S stop that happens just like out of nowhere in this poem. And it's really grammatically unexpected. Because one, we just haven't seen that many capital letters. We haven't seen any abnormal capitalization. And then we get to this point and it's like, whoa, right? Even subconsciously, like that stop hits harder because it's capitalized. And that's at the exact same moment that the first truly unexpected thing happens in this poem of like the participation of Sharon. Like that first verbalization, that first action. And that's really cool. Jarring, right? We were talking about things being jarring last stream and how that can be effective. This capital S is massively grammatically jarring and massively effective in this case. And I put a star here, moving forward. Don't do it. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. And that was referring to this whole section of like, these things are going to happen to you that you don't know. Which I think, again, like we're covering all of these different impulses that happen when we look at something old, right? I look at a photo and I imagine that world is maybe like one of the first things I do. I might place myself in that world. I might judge that world. They are kids. They are dumb. Another thing I might do when looking at the past is, think about what they don't know, right? To sort of fill in the history in between. Like you look at a photo of, I don't know, like there's something very fascinating, let's say, about looking at a photo of New York with the Twin Towers, right, before 2001, right? I think this is something that happens to a lot of people. You'd see this and you'd be like, whoa, they don't know that 9/11 is going to happen. Those people haven't like had that, sort of massive, I guess, American cultural shift yet. And that's like a bit of imagination that happens. You look at a drawing of, or a sculpture from the Roman Empire or a painting, and you're like, they don't know that their empire is going to fall. They don't know, how history is going to develop ahead of them. So this is like yet another one of these very natural impulses, these shared experiences that occur when looking at the past. And Sharon Olds really beautifully weaves them in to create this narrative of like herself engaging with these people and like the things she would say to them and all of this stuff. And I think to me, like, all of this is getting at like, when I read this poem, when I read this poem, like these are the things that to me, bring me into that actual experience. Um, because, I guess if one were to write about something like looking at an old photo and really pay attention to like all the thoughts happening in one's own head, which I think is really what poetry is. It's just really paying attention to things on a granular and minute level, every facet of an experience and what's happening. Um, you know, and I don't know the process of Sharon Olds or how this was written, but it's as if she has gone through and very specifically captured every little facet of an experience with like such specificity that, you know, when I read that, I share in that because of how like true and how like honest of an observation that is. That's like maybe the best way I can put it. Um, the I want to live hits pretty deep. Like, I want to prevent all this bad, but I want to live more. Yeah. I mean, that's like the, yeah, I mean, that's one of the most powerful lines in this poem to me as well. Um, really, really important, sticks out, right? I want to live. Um, and yeah, it like this poem asks a really big question, a sort of philosophic existential question. And you say, I want to prevent all the bad, but I want to live more. And, maybe the question then is life worth like the suffering? Is like really a fundamental thing that's alluded to. I don't think it's like that's not specifically asked or stated, but this question, like this whole thing alludes to that idea. You know, is it worth it? Does the suffering outweigh the life? Does the life outweigh the suffering? And I mean, the intuitive answer, right, if I'm to like engage with the question a little bit with my own belief, or my own views, uh, is that intuitively, like, for everyone who is alive, the answer to this is yes, because they are alive. Because if life wasn't worth the suffering and that was truly, believed in a person's heart, I think the alternative action would be taken automatically, basically. Um, like if it wasn't, whatever, right? uh, but in the framing of this poem, I think there's also like a choice here, saying like I am choosing to keep living. I am choosing to not erase myself. I am choosing to engage with my life as basically everything outside of that, right? The poem doesn't even need to talk about all of the beautiful things and the reasons to live in her life, because it's just implied as the converse to like all the bad things. And like, I mean, I think that's part of what makes this line so powerful, is really like the start, like all of this poem up to there is suffering, right? It's veiled, but like there is under like the weight of knowledge, plates of blood, this comfort and this lightness amidst wrought iron and swords and pain, right? All of these heavy things are about to happen. They're dumb, they're kids, they're irresponsible, right? I want to stop this. I want to tell them all the fucked up things about their life. Like, really, like, almost the entire poem up to that point is uh pain. Even pitiful, beautiful, untouched body does not feel beautiful, right? Like, the fact that it is beautiful and untouched is the pitiful part, and it's a sign of ignorance and it's a sign of naivety. So, like, really, there's nothing, right, with a positive connotation in the first, I don't know, we'll call that 4/5 of this poem. Um, right? And you say it hits pretty deep, Nikki. I think that's part of it, is like, this is the first instance of a truly positive, optimistic sentiment in the entire poem. Uh, and we've had to like reach it through all of this. And I think that probably also maps onto like the story of a life full of suffering. Is it's painful for a long time, especially when we think of someone who maybe experienced a lot of this pain as a child. And it's only later on, it's only after processing all of these things and breaking down the past and the generational trauma that, like, forward, I want to live actually happens. So again, like, the way that the poem is structured, the way the poem is written, like, maps onto the reality of life. Apparently her father was an abusive alcoholic. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Based on the little bit that we read and this poem. Also, like, always, I really appreciate that, Nikki. Kind of finding that context for the specificity, because I mean, I guess there is plenty of time if I want to go research stuff within the analysis, but generally I like to keep it on the page. But if chat goes and finds bits of context for me, I mean, like, it's super duper like helpful for our collective understanding. So I appreciate that. Father was an abusive alcoholic. Makes sense. Yeah, and like, I think that adds, right, to this weight of knowledge, this weight of what they don't know. They were beautiful, pitiful, and untouched, right? So in this moment, she also can imagine her father, right? And we have the arrogance, we have the hint of that idea of abuse. We have hungry in the mother. They're not described well. But like, we can also like in this poem, what's also happening is imagining something better, like a time before, all the bad stuff, a time when they were still untouched, a time when they were still innocent. And I mean, as a list of the things we do in thinking about history, right? So often history is reminisced as better times, right? And she almost, like, in this work fantasizes about, like, not fantasizes, but maybe goes and visits and goes back to a time, because it was real, right, where her father and mother were, like, not awful. And that's very heavy. To think about that, right? Yeah, powerful line. I want to live. um, and to sort of close out that thought of this, like, looking at the past, looking at an old photo, sort of first topic. We of course then have the paper dolls, these like literal photos, things on paper, these little cutouts of people made of paper. Um, and bang them together at the hips like chips of flint. We make them like animate and inanimate at the same time, which is the beauty of a photo. It carries life, but it's also an object, as if to strike sparks from them. uh, and I think that's beautiful because this is then characterizing, or like the sparks are alluding to birth. They're calling to the idea of the future Sharon as the sparks, as something energetic, as something fiery, as something that can make like change, something not so inanimate as the rest of the poem in some capacity. Sparks also burn paper, right? Um, so in that way, they are creating that thing that can leave them behind, that can like truly grieve them and, you know, move on, burn them. Very intense way to say that. Subtle, though, with the sparks. I say, do what you were going to do, and I will tell about it. Yeah, this poem's incredible. Uh, yeah. um, so that was that first thought. I had this vibe, I had this feeling. This poem makes me feel this way. Why? Right? That's blurry. Right? It feels like looking at an old photo. And like, I went through that whole process because I haven't really done that on stream very much, of saying like, here is something that this poem makes me feel. Why does it make me feel this thing? Right? And I did that because I think that's an action that's accessible to anybody who reads a poem and then feels something about it and has like some amount of critical capacity. And that isn't to say that like this poem has to literally evoke in you the feeling of looking at an old photo and recollection. But it is to sort of show, like, regardless of what something makes you feel, regardless of how a poem makes you react, that's something that can be delved into. And I mean, like, personally, for me, as I pulled at all of these threads and like sort of framed this entire poem, right? All of this light blue was the color that I was relating to this feeling, right? This whole poem can be like felt within that frame. And then now if I go read this whole thing again, like even as I was reading it, like that feeling gets amplified to me, where like I feel that more strongly than before. And I mean, I think that's the sign of a great, I don't know, an effective piece of writing. Man, this poem is heavy. This is a gorgeous poem, super layered. Yeah. And that's only even talking about, one of the layers that I was really like interested in at first. I think maybe we covered this one too. The idea of maybe why it works, that we can go back in time and do something we can't do through this idea of imagination and history. But I don't think these vibes necessarily cover like the end of the poem, which is the other thing that is really interesting to me. This, like, and I will tell about it. Because really, like, once we get to I want to live, maybe this is the other big division in the poem, is this first section where we set the stage, this middle section where she wants to tell them something, these various things. And then this last section, but I don't do that. And now we like zoom back and we come back to, I guess we'll do it in pretty heavy quotes, real life, because I think that memory is as real as anything else in this poem. Where we come back to like material, actual Sharon with the photos. We come back to that, and then now this is like, so where do we go from here? Right, and this question of like, how do I act? Like, what's the conclusion? What did I actually get from all of that pondering the past and questioning whether I would tell my parents to, not birth me? Right, that's like the next that's like the other major section of the poem that sort of steps outside of that conception of like the dream like uh recollection, right? Where we come back to reality. And I will get to that, but I want to like come up for air for a second, like just myself. uh uh cuz yeah, it's just very heavy. And just intense. And I'm more than willing to take a little brief mental break to like look away from the poem, even if it's not the Twitch scheduled ad time. um, and it's a good thing to like be doing this, to be like taking the break. I think where I think there's no right way, there's no wrong way to read poetry. But I think if you're reading poetry and engaging with it and thinking about it and feeling it on a level where you have to like physically remove yourself, I'm even gonna like turn the screen off so I'm not like leaning. I was literally like leaning away from it because I just didn't want to look at it. If that's the level on which you're like engaging with any piece of art, I think you're doing yourself a great service, right? To really, I guess, like empathize in that way. Listen, to really try to engage with the poem, hear it, feel it, be open to it, whatever words people want to use or prefer. That's very good practice as a person, also as a poet, because I think when we exist outside of reading, I think that's a good way to engage with the world, right? That poem doesn't exist without Sharon Olds really deeply spending time with the idea of looking at these photos, with the idea of this trauma. Basho's poem about the frog jumping into the pond doesn't exist without Basho being open and receptive to the world in that moment and really listening and trying to understand the implication of like the events around him. And I think that goes for like any poem, right? And any poet, where we don't create art without being receptive to the world. And the world can also be very like difficult to just be open and receptive to, because the world can be a very scary and dangerous place. Where even at the start of the stream, we were talking about like global politics, and it was like, hey, can we like maybe not talk about how miserable the world is? And I think if one is at all times entirely eyes open to how much suffering there is in the world, I think it's genuinely like I mean, it's trauma enough to like induce deep psychosis. Um, I can say from experience, maybe. um, or like worse, or other bad reactions, depression, that kind of stuff. Uh, but poetry gives us a place, like a cultivated environment. Art gives us a cultivated environment to be open to something where I can sit with this piece and kind of know what exists inside of it. And if I like it on first impression, I can continue to engage with it and continue to like be open to those ideas and get more from it. And it's a bit safer in a sense than like the world as a whole, where the world can just like surprise you and be full of violence and unexpected suffering. Uh like art is a very safe way to engage with ideas, and I think it's very valuable for that. Um, for the sensitive kind who maybe can't always grapple with everything all at once at the same time, myself included. Those are thoughts. I'm not sure if those are necessarily off base or on base, but I like the sound of them. I like words that sound, true-ish. It's the best I can do. Oh, my back is. Yeah, it's a good stretch. We'll go back to the poem in a second. Yeah, I'm definitely having a very visceral gut reaction to this poem. Same. Yeah, I mean, I'm very, and I think this is why we like have famous poets. This is why we have classic and well-known poems, because like the more people who read this and have that gut reaction, I mean, like those are the things that like stick with us and teach us something and make us feel something. And that's why I mean, that's like a good reason just to recommend that people read established things, is because they're somewhat vetted into like someone has probably had a really powerful feeling to this poem. Maybe you should check it out too. And if you don't, maybe you should think about why someone else might have loved this poem and you don't vibe with it, and how those contexts differ, etc. That's all important. And yeah, this poem, I got that visceral feeling where it felt like stepping into this experience. It felt like it truly, placed me into that artistic experience, and like I was just like locked in on this poem. It was like flow state as fuck. And yeah, um that's the type of poet I want to be, so I should read this style for sure. Yeah, and I mean, I think the interesting thing is that, right, that gut reaction, I mean, all of this analysis was me maybe trying to understand, like, why am I getting that gut reaction? And Nikki, you've probably had other poems give you that gut reaction. I think you've talked about William Blake before as someone you like. And I think a really beneficial thing to do is sometimes it stops being beneficial to just read more of that stuff and to start being critical and to start asking, what is happening here that makes those gut reactions happen? First, to say, I'm having a gut reaction to this poem. What is it? What is the feeling? Can I put words onto this? Right? And that was me saying, I feel like I'm looking at an old photo. And then saying, what is this poem doing? What are the things happening here that resonate with that feeling? Where is that coming from within this work? And then you maybe start to identify like literal techniques, right? We talked literally about, why the five senses were pulling me into this opening thing. We talked about even like the capitalization here and like the punctuation. We talked about, I think, uh, maybe some of this, I use the word illusion a lot as a technique, that this poem is alluding to ideas outside of itself. The way that it's maybe calling to specific shared experiences of people. And then now I can say, me personally, right, because I did this sort of work, okay, I liked these things. Now how can I implement this in my own work? And I think, to me, like, that's the most important step. Like, just reading more is great, right? But when you can read and then also take the leap of criticism, or not criticism, but being critical thought. Why, how, what's happening? Why is this making me feel this way? Those questions, I think, are the things that really like catapult us forward in terms of, becoming that poet, right? That's the type of poet you want to be. And at least to me, as I understand it, right, this is the sort of work to be done to become that poet. Because how can you become something that you don't like really understand, right? If you don't understand the workings behind, how the poet is making these feelings happen, then like, how are you going to do it, right? Intuitively, sure, that's maybe an option. But I think some formal knowledge, some like detailed, thought through knowledge can be helpful. Maybe a shortcut if you like know how to do it. Cross out Imogen creates a new justification for analyzing poetry that was different than the last one they gave on your 2/3 Lotus bingo cards. Because I just did that again. So, I want to talk about the last line. I want to talk about, and I will tell about it. Right. Because this line, right, if I had to say, like, what are the lines that hit me hardest in this poem? What are the moments? The moments are, I will tell about it. Probably this might be the most impactful. I want to live is up there as well. And I think, like, probably you are going to die, or you are going to do bad things to children, and then, like, say stop, right? These are the big moments. But this is the biggest moment for me. And like, that's another thing we can question, that I can question, what is happening here that like hits me so hard? And since it's the last line, I'm just going to go for reading the whole poem again, because I would like it to hit me within context. And You know, maybe this acts as a sort of explanation, what I've just been saying as to why I read things over and over again, um, is because, like, I've identified something I want to feel. I want to feel this again. I want to understand this feeling. I want to understand this moment. And so the more times I iterate, the more times I experience it again, the closer I might get to understanding. It's like practice, I go back to May 1937. I see them standing at the formal gates of their colleges. I see my father strolling out under the ochre sandstone arch, the red tiles glinting like bent plates of blood behind his head. I see my mother, with a few light books at her hip, standing at the pillar made of tiny bricks, the wrought iron gate still open behind her, its sword tips aglow in the May air. They are about to graduate. They are about to get married. They are kids. They are dumb. All they know is they are innocent. They would never hurt anybody. That's like foreshadowing in a poem. That's sick. I want to go up to them and say, stop. Don't do it. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. You are going to do things you cannot imagine you would ever do. You are going to do bad things to children. You are going to suffer in ways you have not heard of. You are going to want to die. I want to go up to them there in the late May sunlight and say it. Her hungry, pretty face turning to me, her pitiful, beautiful, untouched body, his arrogant, handsome face turning to me, his pitiful, beautiful, untouched body. But I don't do it. I want to live. I take them up, like the male and female paper dolls, and bang them together at the hips, like chips of flint, as if to strike sparks from them. I say, do what you are going to do, and I will tell about it. This poem is so good. I go back to May 1937. So why do I love this line? I love this line. That's a take your breath away poem. Yeah. I love this line because it does like a couple things immediately to me, right? That like really jump out. And I'm going to include I say from before. I say, do what you are going to do. Right? So what we've done here is, in this last line, we've like sort of inverted the entire poem that happened before, right? I want to go up to them, right, and say stop, right? Say these things. We even say down here again, and say it, right? So twice we say, I want to go up to them and say stop. I want to go up to them and say it, right? Her hungry, pretty face turning to me, all of that, right? So we're like saying, I want to say this thing. I want to say the thing. Here's all these things I want to say. And then in the last line of the poem, we sort of say the exact opposite thing, right? That up until this point, it's been like, I want to do this thing, right? So we've like gone the other way. um, and in so, right, you're calling back to this I say. We're calling back to everything happening in this section of the poem, which is basically the here's all the stupid shit they're going to do part of the poem. And so when we use this specific vernacular, I say, calling back to these moments, do what you are going to do. This line carries inside of it, right, this entire section. Do what you are going to do. Right. And so it really, like, what you are going to do, like, summarizes sort of the entirety of the suffering that she has felt on behalf of her parents and the suffering that her parents have felt on behalf of each other. Right. This is like all the trauma, all the generational trauma. That's very dark, but it says trauma. And I will tell about it. And so this line serves as a juxtaposition of like all of the pain, right, of my life as it relates to you. Not all the pain of my life, but as it relates to you. And here is the answer, right? I talked about this as like a thesis, which is like a bad word, but also as a conclusion, as a reclamation, as acceptance, as owning it, right? Also as a reaction. You are going to do everything you're going to do, and I can't change that, right? You are going to do. It's set in stone. This has occurred. It's already occurred. And then, like, this and I will tell about it serves to me to say, like, and this is the way I will cope. You know, this is the way forward to tell about it, to like get that off my chest. And in a sense, and I will tell about it summarizes the entire poem. It brings us back to the whole thing and says, like, look, this is the reclamation of the poet's experience by retelling the trauma they've felt at the hands of their parents, right? And, like, it also has this very, like, innocent way of speaking, and I will tell. And I will tell about it. You know, like that feels like just very plain, but also it's like slightly childish language where a child would say like, oh, they're going to tell on you, right? Like that's really what it evokes for me, right? You know, I'm going to tell on you, but I'm going to tell about it. I'm going to share this story. I'm going to do this thing that probably because of my upbringing, like based on the context we've heard, I was not supposed to do. I was supposed to like hide that and like shove away the history in the past. And so I will tell about it. I will tell my story is like the way out, is the way to reclaim and the way to move forward. And it really is like in the same way as I want to live, like this is the answer of how I will live, right? I've decided to live, and in my living, I will tell of the pain. And I think generally when we think about being writers or telling stories at all, right, we often do this to grapple with pain, either in like the sense of a cautionary tale to urge someone away from pain, or just to like confessionally dump out our pain for that like catharsis, or you know, in accusation and like that sort of thing where we like use the story as a way to kind of have some amount of like vengeance against our past. Like these are things we do with stories. Um and and in so like we lift some of that pain like off of ourselves, and other people relate to it. And I think it goes back to that question, right? Like, is life worth the suffering? Um and like, maybe not when you can't tell about it, maybe not when you don't have other people, maybe not when you're grappling with it alone, and you have like this family bearing down on you, and the people who are like supposed to be close to you like fundamentally, undermining your safety. Um and then that makes like telling about it, like that ultimate, almost like salvatory action, um which like the artist engages in. And then there's like all that like empathy stuff, and you know being realized and reclaiming, and all of those words I used, right? um and and I like how like this, the other thing is this shifts agency, right? I mean, in this whole poem, really, right? Oh, okay, this is like brilliant, 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 brilliant. um in this entire poem, Sharon Olds has agency over her parents, and she is the one in control of her own life and her own destiny, right? By placing her as an actor in this scene, she has the choice to rewrite her past and erase herself, right? In being able to say this or say this, she gives herself a choice and like empowers herself over her trauma in this poem, right? And then when we get into this line, right, I take them up, right? Which is very similar to like I go up to them. Um I take them up, as if like she literally has control over her parents. They're these dolls. They are nothing. Like they no longer have the capacity to cause her pain. Like this is like, it almost feels like on a really deep level like the liberation from trauma, to say like this is mine and it can't hurt me now. It's this doll. It's this thing from then. Um and bang them together at the hips like chips of flint, as if to strike sparks from them. Maybe another meaning of this, like flint is a tool, flint creates something bright, as if this poem, right, is her striking the parents together to create something beautiful, right? That could be another way to interpret that line. Yeah, she stripped them of their agency over her, and now she has agency over her memory to do with it what she will, right? So they can do whatever they want because it's hers, right? It's hers to tell about. It's her memory. And like I got kind of energetic there, kind of excited, because what like a powerful um, way to conclude a poem. Like, and I mean, that's the part that's like, so, I mean, that, I think that's very take your breath away, as is I Want to Live, because these are these like supreme moments of choice where like really like one becomes in control over their trauma, right? I'm quite happy with this analysis. Um, my poetry final at university ended with, me? I think I'll write a poem about you so that others may know where they have arrived. But it was about imagined people. This feels way more powerful. Yeah, I mean, Sharon Olds was probably, I don't know when this poem was written, but she probably had a few years of experience on you. I'm not sure. Um, it's hard to write anything powerful in college, I think. um, Me, I think I'll write a poem about you so that others may know where they have arrived. But yeah, that really is like the same sentiment, Nikki. And I mean, I bet the fact that, you know, I'm sure that sentiment that you share maybe helps this poem be additionally powerful, right? And relevant to you. I'd imagine. You know, I can't be certain. um, Telling about it is how you stay alive through the suffering sometimes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you can't do it alone, right? You tell someone. Um, that's pretty like internet, like foundational wisdom. Oh, this 100% resonates on all cylinders. I'm glad. Um, is this like your first time like experiencing this poem? Like, had you read it before at all, or is this like your was this just like out of nowhere to turn your Saturday into a your Saturday afternoon into a deeply emotionally resonant, you know, cylinder shaking, uh, poetic experience? I don't think I've ever read Sharon Olds. You've never heard of Sharon Olds before? I had heard of her, like I knew the name because she's like a big deal. Uh, she's like definitely like American poetry, like royalty, especially like modern. I think she's American. Yeah, oh yeah, we read this. She was born in San Francisco. Grew up in Berkeley. Um, but I'd never really read her before. Um, I think, and she's still alive, and that's really cool. Um, I think I think the latest issue of Poetry Magazine, yeah, the latest issue of this that I just got has Sharon Olds, so she is still actively, you know, writing and publishing poetry, uh, which is very exciting, right? And I mean, definitely this is something like I try to encourage, and maybe this is something I will do. Um, is like if you if you like something, uh, you know, like this person's alive. Like I am very able to go and tell Sharon Olds how much I loved her poem, right? Like that's something that I'm trying to find the poem in here. I want to see what the new poem is called. Oh, there's two in here. Oh, I get two more Sharon Olds when I read this. That's exciting. But like I can actually go and like probably find her and find her email and send her a message and be like, "Oh my gosh, I loved. I go back to May 1937. Here are my thoughts." And she'd probably appreciate that, right? Like I don't think many people actually take the time to go like tell an artist how much they like their work. Um, and all I know is that if someone out of the blue sent me a message like that, I would be very, you know, I can get a little warm and fuzzy inside. My poetry professor focused more on classics. Um, he was super into imagery and specificity, and that's good. Like those are very important uh, foundational skills, right? You learn how to create images. You learn how to be specific. You learn how to have strong metaphor, so you can like, uh, you know, then tastefully like do other things and go in other directions. Oh, cool! You're sending your poetry final. That's cool. I will. I won't read it right now, but maybe another time. Uh, we might have a few more things to to talk about with this poem. I'm not necessarily like done with it per se. Um, but I'm gonna run an ad just to take a break and then come back and maybe there will be more. I mean, there will probably be a little more at least. I'm not sure though. Ad, that means Drink some water, get a snack, step up away from the computer, rest the mind, you know, these kind of things. Move the body. These are very important. They keep you alive. Moving the body, taking care of your mind, drinking water. So do them. Stay alive. For me. Hello. Welcome back. uh we are still, I guess, tentatively talking about Sharon Olds, and I go back to May 1937, which man, what a poem this is. Just such a joy to read from like all perspectives. And like very heavy, but like brings you up at the end, and like ah, great imagery, like command of language, command of casual language, um, like repetition and rhythm stuff, grammar and structure being used. Uh, some of the repetitions in here are crazy. I mean, like you say, right, Nikki, this is a very layered poem, so I'm sure you can find more to talk about. Yes. And I think, you know, that's the case. And I think really with every single poem that I read on stream, that's the case where most poems have layers. Most poems have more things to dig into. Most poems have things where if you spend more time with them, you'll find more to engage with. You'll find more to think about. And so I'm sure you can find more to talk about. I mean, that's it. That's the presumption part of this. There is more to talk about, right? Can I find it is actually like an interesting question, because like I have no illusions that like analyzing things is hard and it takes energy, and analyzing things that have this degree of emotional content is like heavy and it's taxing. And I've been pretty like pleasantly low energy on the whole stream, which is very nice because I've kind of been like able to conserve this this energy long enough to talk about this poem for a couple hours. um Maybe a little less. Maybe we haven't hit 2 hours of actual poem yet, but uh I mean, one's observational skills, one's apparatus to be able to listen, to be able to be open to like these kinds of things, uh, gets tired. It's like a muscle, right? Um, and the more we do it, the better we get. So I'm pretty good at it, that it probably seems like I can just like do this stuff so well. But then it also gets tired, right? And then you have to like rest, and when you're tired, it's harder to do stuff. It's like a muscle. When the muscle is tired, the muscle doesn't want to lift things. Um, and I'm getting to the point of being like fairly just mentally exhausted from this poem. I think that's something to be like expected though in analysis, is when you're trying to engage things on a very technical alongside very emotional level, you're like hitting both halves of the brain, uh really like the whole experience, right? And especially when I'm like talking, then it's like a sort of like pseudo social thing too. I mean, like para is the word we attach on Twitch. Um, though I mean that's sort of an interesting word. I don't know. So like, I think it's important to know, right? Like I always encourage people watching to analyze. I always encourage people to like go do this themselves. Uh, but also I don't think it's right. And this might be like an issue with the fact that I stream these things in these massive, sometimes like 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour streams, where like that's not where one starts, right? It is, and I mean, one can go look at like the first video of me analyzing like Bukowski. It's probably only 40 minutes long for the whole analysis. Um, I'm wearing probably like a goofy ass fit. Um, because my style, I was, exploring at the time. Um, but like, you know, um, that's something that needs to be built up. I think that's important to acknowledge, and I maybe don't mention it enough on stream that like when people start, it's like if you spend 30 minutes with a poem and you've never done that before, that can be so hard and that can be so mentally engaging, and like that is worth a lot of, that's worth commending, being proud of. I was thinking about how lived in this poem feels to describe a few brief moments in time. Yeah, that's a really um, really good observation. Right, I see them standing at the formal gates of their college. I see my father strolling out under the ochre sandstone arch, the red tiles glinting like bent plates of blood behind his head. Right, 5 lines, I'm looking at this one photo. I see my mother with a few light books at her hips, standing at the pillar made of tiny bricks, the wrought iron gate still open behind her, its sword tips aglow in the May air. Looked at her photo. They are about to graduate, they're about to get married, they are kids, they are dumb, all they know is they're innocent, they would never hurt anybody. This is actually one of my like big hard hitting lines too. They would never hurt anyone. It's like it's foreshadowing. It's awesome, but it also speaks to that youthful mindset, and one that I exist in, that like I really don't want to hurt anyone. And I think I can go through a life not doing it, and that's very naive of me, but I think about that, right? Anyway, so that's like now we're thinking about their photos together. But again, we're still just looking at a couple photos. No action has happened, right? And then like I want to go up to them and say, stop. Don't do it. All of these things. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. The things she would say. You are going to do things you cannot imagine you would ever do. You are going to do bad things to children. You are going to suffer in ways you have not heard of. You are going to want to die. I want to go up to them there in the late May sunlight and say it. Her hungry, pretty face turning to me, her pitiful, beautiful, untouched body, his arrogant, handsome face turning to me, his pitiful, beautiful, untouched body. Nothing has happened, right? Right? Like you say, it describes a brief few moments in time. I need to silence my phone because it's beeping at me. Right, and we spend basically like the whole beginning of this poem imagining. And like that kind of imagination and all of those feelings can happen in just a moment, right? They almost exist like non-temporally, where all of that can be evoked in like an instant, right? And then, but I don't do it. I want to live. And I take this one actual physical action, like putting these photos together, which maybe isn't even a real action taken. And I say one thing, right? Do what you're going to do and I will tell about it. Like the whole poem could exist in the span of like 15 seconds. Looking at these photos, putting them together, banging them together. Do what you are going to do and I will tell about it. Right? And yeah, and it really like exists so thoroughly within that moment. And I think that's a very good impulse to follow in poetry, is, and I mean we see it all the way down to like the most minute level of like a haiku, where like those poems are generally grounded in actual events, right? Basho, the moment of the bell ringing, or the frog jumping into the pond. Those are like his two most famous haiku. And right, they're about how like how much can be contained into a very small moment. And I think that is one extremely prevalent way to write poetry, and one of the most important skills we can practice is like how much can be said about a moment. And maybe that's an exercise, since, you know, I like to talk about the things we can do to practice, the things we can take away, right? An exercise. I think these are very helpful once. I have some thoughts. I've been thinking about prompts and exercises lately. But the exercise, you know, we might have from this poem is to take first to take like a single moment in your life, right? And maybe to make it like this poem, if we want to write a poem that maybe models this one, that involves a specific object, right? Something sentimental. And we're going to take that single moment with that object and use it to explore as many, we'll just say as many, because we're doing this for the sake of practice. Sometimes practice can be very helpful to just like maximize, you know, like how many different, explore as many emotions, right? How many different emotions can I pack into this object and keep everything related to it? Emotions, you know, thoughts, judgments, you know, kind of the things we had here, right? Bits of like imagination. Optional within this prompt maybe to like tell a story through that, tell the story of the object, right? And then, you know, if we want to really model this poem as an exercise, cap all of that off with a single action to sort of make all of this feel small, right? Like that's a framework we could do, that we can relate to ourselves in our own way. I could take, you know, a single moment from my life recently, far away, doesn't matter, right now, with an object, and just like do that, right? Like that's a pretty accessible exercise to anybody, right? I think exercises are good sometimes. I've been liking them more. I think more personally, right? More valuable than exercises is just to like write on one's own and like do the confessing and do the pouring out one's emotion and do all of that very like intuitive writing, right? Where it's like, I'm just going to write a poem about something I want to write about. I think this is like the best way to practice poetry, at least early on. And then at some point, I think I've found like after 2 years of these and like 500 poems, but no one else should be counting, right? Like no one should be like, okay, in 2 years, I'll start doing exercise, because this is different for everyone. At some point, and for me, it was after this time, I've gotten kind of bored sometimes of just writing like about the things happening in my life and about the emotions that come up. And like that isn't always enough for me to like feel like intellectually satisfied anymore. And I think, you know, whenever one is bored or not inclined to do this, but wanting to write, I think the exercise is a good way to fill that space. I don't like the idea of forcing oneself to like write at all, or force oneself to like, I'm going to do a prompt or an exercise every day. to me, the best way to like build that up is to write as much as one wants, whenever one wants at first. And then, when that action starts to be lacking, that's when I think it's intuitive to turn to like sort of arbitrary practice. But I've been talking about exercises more because honestly, I write these on stream and do these for myself. And sometimes I will go and actually do them because I think they can be helpful. And what these do is like once we're bored of our own world and our own like, kind of egotistical emotional state, the exercise takes us in a new direction. And like by the time you're bored of yourself, you probably have like some intuitive style developed, at which point like this can place you in a rut of doing the same thing over and over again. That's probably why I'm bored of it. And then that's where we like do exercises to say like, I am going to break myself out of my own mold, right? And that's where like maybe it seems almost like plagiaristic to write a poem with this structure when it's like what Sharon Olds is doing. But I think the point of that is then to, by trying to write like something else or like someone else or about a topic you wouldn't normally write about, you break out of your own rut and you force yourself to do something different and something novel, something exciting. And then if one is really concerned, you can just say, here's the title of my poem after Sharon Olds, or after I Go Back to May 1937. And then you wash yourself of any of that. Yeah. So that's an exercise we can do, maybe, that one can do to, and that's written within the framing of living within a small moment. Another way would be to just, take a single moment, see how much you can get from it, and then like do something to cap it off, to bring it back to the moment. I could imagine, we can think of like Proust, in Search of Lost Time. He talks about a single moment of a man dipping his pastry into his tea and eating it, and that specific flavor taking him back through like 3 pages of like childhood associations. And that's kind of what that is here. And I think that just shows that one could feasibly write pages upon pages, maybe a whole book. That's not what Proust does, but maybe you could, that stems from a single moment and the emotional associations from it. That might be extreme. That might not be a good book because that sounds like an exercise. But, it's a good way to practice. And sometimes in practice, we write our best poetry. Like the idea of an exercise shouldn't be discounted just because it's not like the intuitive writing. This is a heavy poem, both technically and emotionally, for sure. Yeah. I started trying the contests on All Poetry just to branch out. That's how I discovered I'm actually pretty decent at brevities. I'm not familiar with the contests on All Poetry. How do they work? Because I'm really not super ingratiated into like many other digital poetry spaces. They're for fake internet points. Oh, that's fun. So that you get like all poetry points, and there's like an all poetry, like you get badges. I see. Oh, so when I go to like your page, you have like 11 gold badges. Oh. And you're like a level 7 Oh, I see. You're a level 7 Peridot parrot. That must mean you're like all poetry royalty or something. Yeah, you have 11 gold ribbons and all that. Okay. But I mean, and I presume they have like prompts and stuff. So then, yeah, that's probably another way to, branch out, right? And even with you, right? You learned you're pretty decent at brevities. We can discover things we like didn't know we were good at by doing exercises, and that's a cool thing. Uh, Analysis is a great way to generate exercises, you know, as evidenced here, because once you understand what something is doing, right? Like the exercise just becomes I'm going to take one of the things this poem does and write instructions, do that too. Um, and then you've created an exercise. That's crazy. It's like infinite. I feel like I should be like going on my Substack and saying like here's a poetry exercise inspired by Sharon Olds, and go read this poem, and I can talk about some of my analysis, and then here's an exercise so you can practice these concepts yourself. I'm saying it in a funny voice, but I really should be doing that, huh? Not should, but I could, right? Like I could be making little online poetry educational stuff. Like I've literally already done all the work. Just have to type it up, and then I could like link my stream. That would be so wise of me. That'd be so. It'd be very content though. Anyway, um, I'm glad we came back to it because we got that little exercise out of it and got that um, little bit of discussion. I think I'm done with this poem though, so I'm gonna read it one more time because I wanna give it an earnest read and feel it, and then we can talk if there's more to talk about. I go back to May 1937 by Sharon Olds. I see them standing at the formal gates of their colleges. I see my father strolling. I'm going to start again. I go back to May 1937 by Sharon Olds. I see them standing at the formal gates of their colleges. I see my father strolling out under the ochre sandstone arch, the red tiles glinting like bent plates of blood behind his head. I see my mother with a few light books at her hip, standing at the pillar made of tiny bricks, the wrought iron gate still open behind her, its sword tips aglow in the May air. They are about to graduate. They are about to get married. They are kids. They are dumb. All they know is they are innocent. They would never hurt anybody. I want to go up to them and say, stop. Don't do it. She's the wrong woman. He's the wrong man. You are going to do things you cannot imagine you would ever do. You are going to do bad things to children. You are going to suffer in ways you have not heard of. You are going to want to die. I want to go up to them there in the late May sunlight and say it. Her hungry, pretty face turning to me, her pitiful, beautiful, untouched body, his arrogant, handsome face turning to me, his pitiful, beautiful, untouched body. But I don't do it. I want to live. I take them up like the male and female paper dolls, and bang them together at the hips like chips of flint, as if to strike sparks from them. I say, do what you are going to do, and I will tell about it. I go back to May 1937 by Sharon Olds. That's like one of my favorite analyses I've done. So I'm very glad to have done it. I learned a lot. Yeah, it's a good poem.